Hey guys, tonight we begin with a quiet contradiction from the ancient world. That the most important places along the vast, dangerous Silk Road were not the palaces, not the markets, not the cities, but the silent stone courtyards hidden in the desert, where travelers rested, traded news, and trusted their lives to walls built for strangers. Some caravanserais stood so alone in the wilderness that travelers said their lamps could be seen from miles away, flickering like fallen stars on the horizon. Others were so crowded that a single night inside their walls meant meeting languages and faces from half the known earth. And yet, most of us today would barely last an hour in those conditions. Heat that shimmered the air, dust that clung to skin like a second garment, and the constant uncertainty of who might arrive next through the desert gate. Warm air gathers in the quiet courtyard as dawn rises. Dust hangs gently in the stillness, camels shift their weight, bells chiming softly. Shadows stretch long across sun-warmed stone. The world feels slow here, slow enough for footsteps, breath, and distant whine to become part of the walls themselves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, tell me in the comments where you're rewatching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Dawn approaches slowly across the desert, not in a burst of color, but in a long, patient unfurling of light that softens the horizon. The stars pale one by one, dissolving into the faint glow rising behind the dunes. The air is cool in this early moment, carrying with it a softness that vanishes as soon as the sun gains strength. For now, though, the desert breathes gently, and the first muted sounds of life begin to stir along the hard-packed road leading toward the caravanserai. The caravan moves like a single creature across the quiet land, its rhythm held together by the steady footfalls of camels. Their padded steps make little sound on the ground, leaving only shallow imprints in the dust. Bells tied to their saddles chime softly with each shift of weight, their tones delicate as dew. A faint groan passes among the animals as they catch the morning scent of water and shelter. They know this place even if travelers do not. At the head of the caravan walks the elder caravan master, his steps unhurried despite the long journey behind him. His robe carries a layer of fine dust, giving it the subdued color of unglazed pottery. When he lifts his gaze toward the faint silhouette of the caravanserai in the distance, his expression does not change. Stone walls mark the promise of rest, but there is no rush in his stride. Journeys on the Silk Road teach patience more effectively than any tutor. Behind him, travelers shake off the stiffness of night. Some adjust the cloth wrapping their heads, tightening it against the chill. Others shift on the wooden saddles, stretching legs cramped from hours spent swaying with the camel's movements. A merchant in embroidered sleeves rubs his eyes and mutters that he hopes the kitchen inside the walls still has warm bread from yesterday. Another traveler chuckles softly, saying that the bread in these desert places is always hard enough to teach teeth humility. Their voices fade quickly into the vastness around them. The morning breeze carries a faint hint of something foreign, spices perhaps, cinnamon or cardamom seeping through the cracks of the caravan's cargo bundles. Each traveler carries their own world of scents, leather bags oiled for protection, metalwork wrapped in cloth, woven textiles smelling faintly of dye, and the familiar animal scent of the camels themselves. Even the desert has its own smell at dawn, dry and mineral, as though the earth is exhaling before the heat arrives. The caravanserai draws closer with each passing moment. From afar, it appears almost like a natural formation, earth-toned, rectangular, its edges softened by wind-blown sand. As the caravan approaches, the details emerge slowly, the high stone walls built with thick blocks, the single arched entrance facing the road, the wooden doors reinforced with iron bands. Though simple in form, the building radiates a quiet authority. It has watched over countless travelers, storms, and caravans passing through this stretching corridor of trade. Dogs somewhere inside begin barking, the sound echoing faintly against the walls. A moment later, the noise settles again, replaced by the hollow call of a distant bird. A guard steps onto the parapet above the gate, only a silhouette at first, then a man with a wrapped turban, leaning on his spear. He watches the arriving caravan with calm familiarity. Caravans are as constant as the desert wind, though each brings new faces, new stories, and new uncertainties. The sun's edge breaks over the horizon now, washing the dunes in a gentle gold. The light reveals the subtle ripples shaped by night winds. Shadows stretch long and thin beside the camels' legs, giving their movements an almost elongated grace. A young boy walking near the rear of the caravan shields his eyes and whispers that the sun arrives too early here. A fellow traveler replies that the sun has its own traveling to do and cannot wait for sleepy eyes. Their quiet exchange dissolves into the shimmering air. As the caravan closes the final distance, the faint rumble of hooves and footsteps softens. Camels begin to slow of their own accord, knowing the rituals that await. They lift their heads, sniffing the air. Somewhere inside, there is water, stale perhaps, warm, but precious all the same. The travelers, too, straighten their backs, the sight of the gate pulling them inward. The elder caravan master raises his hand, and the whole line gently halts, dust drifting upward from the sudden stillness. The moment just before arrival is always quiet. A hush falls across the group, broken only by the shifting of saddles and the occasional snort of an impatient camel. The guard above gives a small wave to indicate that the gatekeeper has been alerted. A second figure appears, then disappears behind the wooden doors. The faint sound of iron bolts shifting carries across the still desert air. A merchant in the center of the caravan reaches down to adjust a cloth bundle tied beside him. Something jingles faintly within, perhaps coins, perhaps ornaments. Another traveler adjusts his pack and mutters about the soreness in his shoulders. Someone jokes softly that, if the Silk Road had feathers instead of stones, travel would be easier, though less interesting. The laugh that follows is brief but sincere. Even fatigue cannot dull the quiet humor born from any days on the move. A camel in the rear of the caravan chooses this moment to groan loudly, shaking its head with theatrical misery. Dust shakes loose from its fur, forming a small cloud that drifts lazily toward its neighbor. The camel beside it responds with an indignant grunt. Their conversation continues for several moments, echoing through the early morning air. A young traveler pats the nearest camel's neck, murmuring something like reassurance, though the animal seems unconvinced. At last, the heavy doors of the Caravanserai begin to open. The wooden planks shift with a deep, resonant creak, one that seems to have sounded for centuries. The gap widens slowly, revealing the cool dimness of the stone passage inside. The guard steps forward, spear still in hand, and gestures for the caravan to approach. The elder caravan master moves first, taking a slow step toward the open gate. The camels behind him begin to follow, their bells chiming softly again. Dust lifts beneath their feet, catching the sunlight in thin, shimmering layers. The travelers straighten themselves once more, preparing to enter the place that will hold them for the day and the night. Inside those walls lies the small world of the Caravanserai, a refuge shaped by stone and water, a crossroads of languages and goods, a place where stories gather like shadows at dusk. But for now, the caravan pauses at the threshold, held in the quiet promise of rest as dawn settles gently over the desert. The wooden gates of the Caravanserai continue their long, deliberate movement inward, the heavy planks shifting as though roused from deep sleep. Their hinges voice a low groan that rolls across the still air, a sound so familiar to the desert that even the wind seems to quiet for a moment, listening. When the doors finally reach their full width, a shaded passage reveals itself, a short corridor of cool stone leading into the heart of the Caravanserai. The guard steps forward from the threshold, his movements unhurried. His robe, dyed a deep tone muted by dust, brushes softly against the stone floor. In the half-light of the entrance, his face is calm, carrying the composed expression of a man who has seen hundreds of caravans arrive and leave again, each one different yet somehow the same. He raises one hand in greeting, palm open, and the caravan master mirrors the gesture with a slight bow of his head. Before anyone passes through, the guard performs the first quiet ritual of arrival. He steps closer to the caravan master and leans in just enough to catch his voice over the faint stirring of camels behind them. A few murmured questions exchange between them: where the caravan journeyed from, whether they bring goods to sell or only to rest, whether the road behind them was peaceful or troubled. These questions are not spoken loudly. They exist more as shared breath than as conversation, forming a gentle bond of understanding between traveler and guardian of the walls. Satisfied, the guard steps aside and gestures for entry. The caravan master lifts his hand once more, and the line begins to move. The first camel steps into the passage, its hooves striking the stone with soft, padded thuds that echo gently through the enclosed space. The air inside is cooler than outside. The stone absorbs the night's chill and holds it well past dawn. The camel sighs deeply as it crosses the threshold, perhaps in relief, perhaps in resignation. Its long ears flick, it adjusts to the dimness. Behind it, travelers follow in pairs, their footsteps softened by the desert dust that clings to their sandals and boots. The sound of movement creates a quiet chorus: the creak of leather straps, the clink of metal buckles, the soft rustling of cloth brushed by passing bodies. Even whispers seem to linger in this passage longer than they do outside. The coolness is a small blessing, though it carries a faint scent of the stone itself, dry, ancient, touched by countless hands and hooves. A merchant in a bright scarf inhales deeply, remarking under his breath that he would happily sleep in the entranceway if allowed. His companion smirks and replies that the camels might not appreciate sharing the space. The guard, overhearing, hides a brief smile behind his hand. As the caravan emerges from the passage, the courtyard unfolds before them. It is a broad, rectangular space shaped by the surrounding rooms and shaded walkways. The sun has not yet climbed high, so shadows stretch long across the ground, creating patterns of coolness and warmth. The stone floor of the courtyard bears the subtle wear of centuries, smoothed by countless feet, hooves, and the dragging edges of merchants' crates. A basin of water sits near the center, fed by a narrow channel that brings water from a well hidden somewhere deeper within the structure. The basin mirrors the sky imperfectly, its surface broken by gentle ripples from a light morning breeze. A few birds perch on its edge, fluttering away as the first camel approaches, leaving small feathers drifting into the air. Along the edges of the courtyard, under the shade of the cloister, travelers who arrived in the night begin to rise from thin mats. Some sit with legs crossed, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Others stretch their arms overhead slowly, savoring the coolness before the day's heat descends. A pair of men speak softly in a dialect unfamiliar to the arriving caravan, their voices low and rhythmic. Farther off, a woman adjusts her headscarf and folds a blanket with meticulous care. The arriving caravan moves deeper into the courtyard. One camel emits a long, theatrical groan that echoes off the stone walls. The sound earns a few sympathetic chuckles from those already awake. A stable hand, carrying a rope over his shoulder, glances at the camel with a resigned expression. He has clearly heard such complaints from animals far less tired. The guard leads the caravan master toward a shaded alcove where the gatekeeper keeps his records. The gatekeeper, an older man with steady hands and eyes sharpened by years of scrutiny, sits behind a small wooden table. The table is simple but well worn, its surface looking as though it has supported everything from ink pots to heavy iron keys. Without rising, the gatekeeper nods in greeting. A thin scroll lies open before him, weighed down by a polished stone. He takes his reed pen and asks the caravan master for details about the size of the group, the goods they carry, and their intentions. His handwriting is slow but elegant, each symbol shaped with practiced precision. The pen scratches softly against the parchment, a steady, calming sound that blends into the courtyard's quiet hum. While the gatekeeper writes, one of the helpers from the caravan attempts to brush dust off his tunic. This only produces a faint cloud that settles a moment later, leaving his tunic exactly as dusty as before. He sighs dramatically, prompting a few quiet laughs from nearby travelers. Dust, after all, is a companion that never truly leaves on the Silk Road. A stable hand approaches with a polite bow, offering to help guide the camels to the resting area. He moves with careful, practiced steps, slow enough not to startle the animals, firm enough to convey assurance. His clothing carries the distinct scent of the stables, straw, camel fur, and the faint acidity of the morning's cleaning. He takes hold of the first camel's lead rope, and the animal follows with a tired huff. More camels follow, some obediently, others with stubborn reluctance. One refuses to kneel at first, standing tall and blinking slowly, as though pretending not to hear the stable hand's coaxing. Eventually, with a resigned grunt, it lowers itself in stages, first bending one leg, then another, until it folds onto the ground with a thump so exaggerated that a nearby traveler raises an eyebrow. The stable hand pats its neck in mild amusement, whispering something that sounds like a promise of water. Travelers begin to unload their belongings. Cloth bundles tied with rope are carried toward the shaded walkways. Wooden chests are dragged with deliberate slowness to avoid damaging their contents. A merchant carefully lifts a stack of embroidered textiles, running his thumb over the edge of the top piece to ensure the dye has not faded during the journey. Another opens a basket to check whether the pottery within survived the worst stretches of road. The faint clinking reassures him that most of the pieces remain intact. The courtyard fills with the sounds of settling, the shifting of straw beneath tired hooves, the quiet splash of water as someone fills a clay cup, the soft thud of crates placed gently on the ground, the rustle of clothing as travelers stretch their limbs. Along the far wall, a boy from the caravan kneels beside the water basin, cupping handfuls of cool water to splash on his face. The shock of cold pulls a sharp gasp from him, followed by a relieved sigh. A passing traveler smiles knowingly. The basin's water feels almost like a blessing after nights of dry wind and dust. A faint breeze carries with it a curious mixture of smells: wool, leather, distant spices, warm dust, and the earthy scent of water stored in stone. The caravanserai seems to breathe in these scents, holding them softly in its cool spaces. Overhead, pigeons flutter in and out of gaps in the stone walls, cooing softly as they settle on ledges. The birds appear entirely unimpressed by the arrival of yet another caravan. They are the permanent residents here, the true watchers of this place, observing centuries pass with an indifferent tilt of the head. The guard, having finished his initial duties, walks the perimeter of the courtyard to ensure that everything remains calm. His sandals whisper against the stone. His eyes move from traveler to camel to shadowed doorway, not with suspicion, but with the instinctive attentiveness of a man who knows how easily stillness can shift into tension. The gatekeeper closes the scroll and places the stone weights atop it once again. He lifts his gaze to the caravan master, offering a small nod of approval. The formalities are complete. There is no need for spoken dismissal. The simple act of returning the pen to its case signals the end of the ritual. For the caravan, this marks the true beginning of rest. Dust settles slowly in the beams of morning light. The courtyard breathes into quiet rhythm, and the caravan, weary but safe, embraces the promise of the day within these protective walls. The courtyard has fully awakened now, though not with noise or haste. It blossoms into life gently, like a desert flower opening under a rising sun. The early light slides across the stone floor in long, soft bands, warming one side of the courtyard, while the other still rests in cool shadow beneath the shaded walkways. Travelers adjust to this slow shift instinctively, stepping into warmth when their bones crave it, retreating into shade when the promise of heat grows too strong. Camels, having endured the long stretch of road through the night, settle into their own rhythms of rest. Some kneel with their legs folded neatly under them, heads swaying in half sleep. Others ease themselves down with theatrical grunts, exhaling long streams of warm breath that shimmer faintly in the cool morning air. Their thick eyelashes flutter lazily as flies spiral above them. Every so often, one camel issues a deep, bubbling groan, startling a bird perched nearby into flight. The stable hands, used to such display, barely glance up. Near the northern wall of the courtyard, where the shade remains longest, the merchants begin to unload their goods in earnest. They move with the deliberate care of people who know exactly how fragile value can be. One unrolls a bolt of fabric across a raised wooden platform, the threads catching the sunlight in muted blues and dusty golds. The colors glow briefly before the merchant rolls the fabric back up to protect it from dust. Another traveler kneels beside a wooden crate, opening it with a small iron tool and revealing rows of tiny clay bottles, each sealed with wax. The faint scent of something sharp and herbal escapes, a distilled essence traded across hundreds of miles. These items will be sorted, checked, and sometimes traded directly in the courtyard, but for now they remain part of the slow act of unpacking, each movement quiet and precise. The merchants speak to one another in hushed tones, comparing their goods to what they saw in the last market or discussing the weather along the road. One jokes softly that the desertess wines have become so impatient lately that they rush ahead of travelers just to complain about the heat. Another replies that the wines should try carrying a camel load of pottery before voicing such opinions. Their shared laughter drifts into the morning air, blending with the soft rustle of fabrics. Along the western walkway, where the stone columns cast narrow bars of shadow, a healer sorts through her traveling satchels. Her hands move steadily, checking for cracked clay containers and making sure her medicinal herbs survive the journey. She crushes a dried leaf between her fingers, breathing in the scent to test its strength. Satisfied, she wraps it again and places it inside a carefully lined pouch. The healer carries her tools as though she carries fire, with respect, caution, and the awareness that they can bring either comfort or difficulty depending on the moment. Nearby, a young helper refills water troughs from a large clay jar. The water glugs softly, splashing against the stone basin. A few camels rise awkwardly on their long legs, sensing the promise of cool moisture. Their lips curl as they drink, drawing water with surprising delicacy for creatures so large. One camel dips its nose too deeply into the trough and emerges with droplets clinging to its fur, blinking as though the water personally offended it. The helper stifles a laugh, shaking his head as he scoops more water for the others. At the far end of the courtyard, two guards switch their posts. The night watch descends the stone steps from the parapet, moving slowly, their gait stiff from hours spent standing in the cold. Their breath leaves faint traces in the air as they stretch their arms, easing tight muscles. One rubs his neck, muttering that the desert night seems to find new ways to creep into bones each season. His companion replies that the stones on the parapet are jealous of warmth and steal it from anyone foolish enough to stand beside them. Their quiet banter, the kind born of long shifts and comfortable company, blends into the courtyard's gentle hum. The daytime guard takes over the post, ascending the stairs with purposeful calm. From above, the view stretches far across the desert, revealing the faint line of the road the caravan had just traveled. The guard settles into place, spear resting diagonally against the parapet wall. His gaze moves from horizon to courtyard with practiced rhythm. He watches not with suspicion, but with the quiet awareness of someone who must notice small things before they become large problems. In a place that welcomes travelers from distant lands, this watchfulness becomes part of the building's very breath. A pair of pigeons, bold and far too comfortable with human company, land beside a drying cloth near the walkway. One pecks curiously at the frayed edge, then looks offended when the fabric fails to provide anything worth eating. It tilts its head, reconsidering the nature of the universe, before flapping to a nearby perch. The second pigeon remains longer, watching the merchants with quiet judgment, as pigeons often do, before losing interest when one of the stable boys waves a hand to shoo it away. In the eastern corner of the courtyard, where the sun now begins to touch the stone more directly, travelers from a distant region sit in a small circle, preparing tea. They unpack a metal kettle, setting it on a small portable brazier. The smell of heating metal and the faint spice of the leaves begin to drift outward, carried gently by the breeze. They speak little, each movement deliberate and unhurried. When the steam rises in a thin ribbon, curling like dessert smoke, a few other travelers wander closer, drawn by the familiar comfort of warm tea at morning. Across the courtyard, the young boy who splashed water on his face earlier now kneels beside a small woven mat, smoothing it carefully with both hands. The mat has faded with age and travel, but he treats it as though it were a treasured possession. Once it lies flat, he rests upon it, closing his eyes for a moment. Perhaps he imagines the next destination. Perhaps he simply allows himself a brief, quiet thought in the first calm space he's felt in days. The camels shift again, stirring dust into the air. The dust catches the sunlight, creating faint halos around the animals. One camel sneezes unexpectedly, sending a puff of dust onto a nearby traveler's robe. The traveler glances down at his now slightly mottled clothing and sighs with resigned acceptance. Dust, in caravan life, is not a visitor, it is a permanent companion. Along the inner walls of the caravanserai, doorways lead into small rooms lined around the courtyard. Some stand open, showing glimpses of woven mats, clay jugs, and low wooden platforms for sleeping. These rooms are simple but practical, designed for travelers to rest, store their goods, or conduct their quiet business. A few travelers who arrived in the night step into the courtyard now, blinking against the early light. One carries a sleeping blanket under his arm, shaking loose the sand that settled in its folds. Another stretches his legs, rotating his ankles slowly like someone unused to walking without the sway of a ship. The architecture of the caravanserai reveals itself more clearly as the sun climbs. The stone blocks, fitted together with precision, glow in warm tones of beige and rose. The archways cast curves of shadow across the floor. The cloister pillars stand like patient guards, holding the weight of the roof with quiet dignity. From the central courtyard, the building feels like a protective ring, a deliberately shaped pause in the vastness of the road. A healer pauses beneath one of the arches, running her fingers over the carved stone. The patterns are faint now, worn down by countless years, but still visible, swirling lines that mirror desert wines, geometric shapes that echo stars. She murmurs something under her breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a memory. Her voice blends with the soft thoughts of the courtyard. Somewhere deeper inside the caravanserai, beyond the far wall, a faint clatter suggests that the kitchen is beginning its morning rituals. The sound is distant, muffled by stone, but even from here, it carries a promise, warmth, food, and something familiar to ease the weariness of travel. A merchant straightens upon hearing it, remarking softly that he hopes the cook uses less salt today. Another traveler replies that if the cook uses less salt, the desert will probably compensate with extra heat. Their exchange is met with gentle laughter from those nearby. Slowly, the courtyard settles into a pattern, movement softened into routine, voices blending into quiet harmonies, the air warming inch by inch. It is a world within walls, a small sanctuary shaped by stone and time, holding the delicate balance between the vast desert outside and the slow, steady life awakening within. Under the soft morning light filtering into the caravanserai, the work of unpacking begins to deepen. The courtyard, though still quiet, hums gently with motion, not energetic, not hurried, but steady, like a pulse beneath warm stone. The merchants, travelers, and helpers know that the best hours of the day belong to this early light, before the sun rises high enough to turn every task into a negotiation with heat. Along the shaded western walkway, one merchant unties the thick rope securing a tall bundle of goods. The knots have tightened during travel, stiffened by dust, and he works them loose with slow, practiced movements. As the rope falls away, the bundle's contents reveal themselves layer by layer. First comes a cloth covering, woven wool, rubbed soft from days of friction. Beneath it lies a series of smaller wrapped parcels, each one carefully protected with additional cloth and thin matting. He sets the parcels onto a raised wooden platform. Dust falls from them in soft bursts, drifting into the beams of sunlight. The dust hangs for a moment, suspended, then settles quietly on the ground. The merchant unties one parcel, unfolding the cloth with deliberate gentleness. Inside, a polished metal bowl glints in the morning light, its surface catching reflections of the courtyard. He checks it for dents, rubbing his thumb along the rim. Satisfied that it survived the journey intact, he exhales, a breath of relief shared by anyone who knows the fragility of goods carried across long stretches of stone and sand. Nearby, another merchant kneels beside a crate filled with jars. The wax seals gleam faintly. He taps each jar lightly with a finger, listening to the small, reassuring sound of firmness, not a single crack seal. The faint smell of spices drifts into the air as he opens one jar, testing the freshness with a careful, appreciative inhale. A helper assisting him closes his eyes briefly, savoring the aroma that seems to momentarily transport them both to the warm, distant markets where these spices began their journey. Across the courtyard, a group of travelers unrolls bolts of fabric onto a long wooden board positioned beneath the columns. The fabrics fall smoothly, sliding outward in ripples of color: muted red, dusty blue, deep green with threads that shimmer gold under sunlight. The travelers inspect each bolt, comparing the texture, weight, and dye. One holds a piece up to the light, watching it glow as though the sun itself has seeped into the threads. He hums thoughtfully, brushing his fingertips across the weave. The fabric is fine, a mark of skilled craftsmanship, likely from a region far east of this place. A passing boy pauses to stare at the fabrics, his gaze lingering on the shimmering threads. One of the merchants gently nudges him away, not unkindly, simply aware that dust-covered hands and precious textiles form an uneasy partnership. The boy nods, stepping back with a respectful air, though his eyes remain fixed on the colors. Closer to the stables, a merchant unwraps a series of delicate ceramic bowls. Each is protected by strips of woven palm fiber and cloth, the layers dampened slightly to reduce impact on the road. He lifts the bowls one by one, holding them up to inspect for cracks. Their pale surfaces reflect the soft morning light. A tiny chip catches his eye on one bowl's rim, barely noticeable, but enough to decide that this bowl will be used for his own meals rather than sold. He sets it aside with a quiet shrug. A merchant learns not to mourn small losses. The Silk Road takes its share. The stable hands move among the camels, ensuring the animals are settled before the work of transporting goods continues. They check harnesses, adjusting leather straps and smoothing out knots formed during the long journey. The camels, now resting on their folded legs, grunt in mild irritation each time a strap is pulled or a rope adjusted. One camel, in particular, seems determined to complain louder than the others. A stable hand pats its neck, muttering something soothing, but perhaps not entirely complimentary. The camel snorts, spraying dust onto his tunic in what could only be described as deliberate retaliation. Along the eastern walkway, where the morning sun begins to spill across the stone, a handful of travelers arrange small items on a low table. These are the goods meant not for markets, but for trade between fellow travelers. Small ivory carvings, glass beads, rings of hammered copper, carved combs, and tiny boxes filled with dried fruit. Each object carries a faint story in its design, a curve, a symbol, a color indicating where it was made and by whose hands. A traveler picks up a comb carved with a tiny pattern resembling climbing vines. He studies it closely, admiring the craft, before setting it back down with care. The day will bring negotiations, though none in the Caravanserai are rushed. Here, time moves differently. In the northern corner of the courtyard, a man unpacks a heavy chest with the help of 2 assistants. The chest is bound in leather and secured with iron hinges that show their age. As they set it down, one assistant stumbles slightly, causing the chest to land with a louder thud than intended. The man winces, placing a hand over his heart dramatically, as though injured by the sound alone. The assistants exchange amused glances. When they open the chest, a set of brass instruments gleam from within, carefully cushioned by layers of wool. The man checks each one with reverence, lifting them delicately and inspecting the engravings. Brass, after miles of desert, still carries the memory of distant workshops. At the far western wall, a group of traders unfurls carpets, thick, brilliantly woven pieces with patterns as intricate as desert constellations. They shake each carpet gently, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Travelers turn their faces away with amused resignation, accustomed to the inevitable cloud that carpets bring. The patterns vary from region to region, geometric designs that echo the shapes of ancient architecture. Flowing curves inspired by wind-over dunes, motifs symbolizing protection and fortune. One carpet in particular draws attention, dyed a deep red, its border adorned with tiny, careful stitches. A scribe wandering nearby pauses, admiring the precision. He kneels to run his hand over the carpet's surface, feeling the compactness of the weaving. A merchant explains in a soft voice that the dyes used in that carpet come from crushed insects, found only in high-altitude valleys. The scribe raises his brows, murmuring a quiet appreciation for the craft, though he gently steps back when a passing traveler stirs dust around the carpet's edge. Nearby, the healer continues sorting her herbs, glancing occasionally at the goods being unpacked. She has an eye for items with medicinal uses, small metal cups for mixtures, textiles to be used as bandages, even certain spices that double as remedies. Her hands move with calm certainty as she arranges her tools on a cloth laid out beside her. A passing traveler asks whether she has anything for sore shoulders caused by long riding. She lifts a small jar and advises him to use only a little. The traveler nods gratefully, though he whispers to a companion that her remedies often work too well, making a man wonder what else they might cure. The stable boys continue their work, guiding camels toward shaded areas. One camel reluctantly follows a boy, stretching out its neck, exaggerated protest. Another flops onto the ground with dramatic flair, stirring a wave of dust that drifts slowly into the sunlight. The stable hands exchange patient expressions, accustomed to the stubbornness that camels treat as a form of communication. Travelers watching the scene smile softly. In the Caravanserai, morning becomes a gentle dance between human work and the desert's patient acceptance. Goods are placed, animals settle, dust drifts, shadows shift. Above all this, the high walls of the Caravanserai stand in quiet witness. The arches channel soft morning echoes, the stone floor carries the weight of distant lands. The courtyard draws breath from every unpacked good, every footstep, every murmur. A world of movement, shaped by calm purpose, awakens fully within the shelter of these ancient walls. The morning deepens gently within the Caravanserai, and while merchants continue their unwrapping and arrangement of goods, the animals draw their own quiet attention from the stable hands. Caring for camels along the Silk Road is not merely a chore. It is a rhythm of life, as steady and essential as tending a hearth or grinding grain. Without well-kept animals, no merchant would reach the next city, no goods would cross deserts, and no stories would travel from one horizon to the other. The stable yard opens off the main courtyard through a wide archway. A faint smell of straw, warm hide, and sun-dried dung wafts outward, not unpleasant, simply honest, shaped by years of animals settling into the same patterns day after day. The ground here is covered in a mixture of packed earth and scattered straw, with troughs arranged neatly against the far wall. Thin shadows fall across the space, cast by wooden beams above, that offer the animals a respite from the rising sun. The camels move slowly as they're led in, each with its own peculiar gait. Some walk with dignified calm, their long necks held high. Others shuffle reluctantly, legs bending in awkward angles, as though each step is a philosophical decision. One particularly expressive camel pauses at the archway, turning its head sharply toward the courtyard, as if reconsidering all its life choices at once. When the stable boy tugs gently on its rope, the camel emits a deep, bubbling complaint that resonates like a low drumbeat. Travelers passing nearby glance over with amused pity. No creature suffers travel as theatrically as a camel. The stable hands begin their work with quiet efficiency. One checks the animal's hooves, lifting each foot with gentle but firm guidance. The hooves are inspected for cracks or stones caught in the soft underside. Any debris is removed. A faint scraping sound echoes as a tool brushes away sand and hardened mud. The camel sighs with long-suffering patience, as though it has endured far worse indignities on the road, which, to be fair, it probably has. Another stable hand moves along the row with a coarse brush made of date palm fibers. He works the brush down each camel's flank, loosening dust that has settled deeply in their fur. The brushing sends thin clouds of powder into the air that drift lazily before settling on the ground. The camels tolerate the brushing with a curious mix of resignation and pleasure. One leans into the strokes, eyes half closed. Another tries to nibble on the brush, earning a gentle tap on the nose. The stable hand shakes his head as though scolding a child, muttering that brushes are not food, a rule that camel kind, evidently, does not agree with. A third stable hand checks the animal's harnesses and saddles laid nearby. The leather straps lie in a neat row on a low wooden bench. Some straps are worn from the journey and need oiling. The stable hand dips his fingers into a small pot of thick, dark oil and works it into the leather with slow, circular motions. The smell of oiled hide rises softly into the air, earthy, rich, familiar. The stable hand hums under his breath, the tune simple and repetitive, matching the gentle rhythm of his hands. In the far corner of the stable yard, a trough is being filled with water. The water flows from a clay jar carried by a young helper whose small frame wobbles under the weight. He pours carefully, determined not to spill too much. The water splashes softly into the trough, catching the sunlight in brief flashes. When the trough is full, he steps back proudly, wiping sweat from his brow despite the still cool morning. As soon as the trough is prepared, the camels edge forward in an eager line, though line may be too generous a word. The animals crowd around the trough with little sense of order, long necks stretching forward, lips dipping into the water with surprising delicacy. Their gulps are deep, their eyes half-lidded in contentment. A thirsty camel can drink dozens of liters at once, and this morning is no exception. The sound of their drinking, a steady glug glug glug, fills the yard with a soothing, strangely satisfying rhythm. One camel, more impatient than the others, nudges its neighbor aside with a firm bump of its flank, earning a startled grunt in return. A small squabble follows, involving indignant snorts and offended glares. The stable hands intervene swiftly, repositioning the animals with quiet authority. A gentle shove here, a guiding rope there, and peace returns. Even in the simple act of drinking, camels insist on adding a bit of drama. While the animals drink, a merchant steps into the stable yard to check on one particular camel. Its saddle is decorated with more care than the others, a sign that it carries valuable or delicate goods. He approaches the animal slowly, speaking in a low voice that blends with the morning air. The camel lifts its head slightly, recognizing the familiar tone. The merchant inspects the saddlebags, checking their seams for tears. His fingers trace the stitching, confirming that it held through the night's travel. A soft sigh escapes him, relief tracing through his shoulders. He then offers the camel a handful of dried leaves. The animal eyes the offering suspiciously at first, as if evaluating the quality. After a moment, it accepts the leaves, chewing slowly with an expression that can only be described as contemplative. The merchant chuckles quietly, patting the camel's neck. These animals, despite their theatrics, carry the lifeblood of the Silk Road on their backs. Another traveler enters the yard, holding a small clay bowl of grain. He scatters the grain onto the ground near a shaded corner. The camels, noticing the sound, begin a slow, lumbering migration in that direction. Their long legs move with surprising coordination when food is involved. Dust rises around them like a soft, drifting veil. One camel lowers its head so abruptly that its ears brush the shoulder of the traveler beside it. The traveler laughs quietly, stepping aside before becoming part of the meal. In the stable yard's farthest shadowed corner, a young helper kneels beside a smaller camel, one not yet fully mature. Its movements are jerky, its legs still ungainly, and its eyes wide with the uncertainty of youth. The helper checks its harness with patient care. The young camel tries to nibble at his sleeve, then at his elbow, as though confused by what qualifies as food. The helper gently nudges its head away each time, smiling softly. Patience here is as essential as water. On the outer wall, under the wooden beams, leather water skins hang neatly in a row. The sunlight begins to touch them, warming the leather and releasing a faint scent of tanned hide. A stable hand takes them down, one by one, checking for leaks by pressing each gently. He sets aside a skin that hisses faintly under pressure, a sign that its seam has loosened. He will mend it later, stitching the leather with a curved needle and sealing it over the fire. Water skins are precious. A single flaw can turn a day's journey into a danger. As the camels finish their long drink, they begin to settle again, finding patches of shade cast by the beams above. Some fold their legs neatly under them in the fluid, practiced motion that only camels possess, their heavy bodies lowering, as though the earth itself is pulling them downward. Others take longer, easing themselves down in dramatic installments, first lowering their front legs, then pausing as though reconsidering the entire endeavor, before finally surrendering to rest. The stable boys arrange bundles of straw for the animals to sit upon. Although camels can rest on bare earth, the straw helps cushion their joints after long days of carrying weight. A camel settles onto a fresh bundle with a contented grunt. Another eyes the straw with suspicion, before slowly lowering itself, as though testing to see whether the bundle holds secret intentions. The stable boys exchange a quiet smile, accustomed to the animal's exaggerated caution. Shadows shorten gradually as the sun climbs higher. The stable yard brightens, though it remains cooler than the courtyard thanks to its sheltered design. The air fills with the soft rustle of straw, the shifting of heavy bodies, and the occasional groan of a camel adjusting its position. One camel emits a sigh so deep and resigned that a traveler passing by remarks softly to a companion that the creature seems to bear the knowledge of ancient burdens. The companion replies that the camel probably resents breakfast being late. With the animals now settled, watered, brushed, and fed, the stable yard grows still. Dust drifts quietly in the warm beams of light, swirling into gentle patterns before disappearing again. The faint breeze moves through the archway, brushing over the camel's fur like an invisible hand. For a moment, even the animals seem hushed, as though recognizing the peaceful pause. This steady care, this brushing of fur, checking of hooves, mending of straps, filling of troughs, is the quiet labor that carries the Silk Road forward. Within these walls, beneath the rising sun, the caravan's lifeblood rests, breathing in the cool shade before the long day begins. The first true stirrings of the Caravanserai's kitchen begin softly, almost shyly, as though the room itself is unsure whether it wishes to wake. A faint metallic clink echoes from somewhere behind the courtyard wall, not loud, just enough to remind travelers that warmth and food are being coaxed into existence. The kitchen is tucked into the southeastern corner of the Caravanserai, its doorway framed by smoke-darkened stone and the faint scent of last night's embers. Those who have traveled this road before know that this doorway marks a kind of sanctuary within a sanctuary. Inside, the air is cooler than the courtyard, but still carries a delicate heat left over from the night's fading fire. The walls are thick, absorbing warmth slowly and releasing it even more slowly, like steady breathing. The room is lit only by narrow slits in the walls and the faint glow of embers resting beneath ash at the central hearth. Dust motes float lazily in the beams of morning light, drifting like tiny desert spirits summoned by the fire's warmth. A cook stands near the hearth, leaning on a long-handled wooden spoon. Her movements are slow, deliberate, shaped by years of repetition. She lifts the lid from a clay pot, releasing a whisper of steam that spirals upward before dissolving into the air. The faint smell of last night's stew lingers, lentils softened into a thick blend, bits of onion and herb merging together into something simple but deeply comforting. She stirs the pot gently, not to prepare a meal now, but to keep the contents from settling too firmly before they are reawakened later. On a low table nearby lie the tools of the kitchen, arranged not with perfect order, but with a rhythm born from use. Knives with darkened iron blades, wooden bowls, clay cups with chips along their rims, bundles of herbs drying from hooks on the wall, and several round stones still warm from yesterday's baking. A large hand mill sits beside the back wall, its stone surface dusted with the fine remnants of crushed grain. Someone, perhaps the cook, perhaps a helper, has drawn a line through the flour with a fingertip, leaving a curved mark like a small crescent moon. A young helper kneels beside a clay jar, scooping handfuls of grain into a shallow bowl. The grains shift like pale sand, sifting through his fingers with a quiet, familiar whisper. He sorts them carefully, removing small stones that somehow always manage to find their way into the harvest. His eyes narrow as he examines each handful. The cook glances at him occasionally, offering a nod of approval when he places another stone into the small discard pile. It is a steady job, slow and meticulous, but one that saves teeth from unfortunate surprises. In the corner nearest the door, the morning light falls across a wooden cutting board. On it rests a small pile of onions, their skins papery and shining faintly in the cool light. A knife lies beside them. The helper assigned to them approaches reluctantly, already wiping his eyes in anticipation. He picks up the knife and begins slicing the first onion, trying to breathe through his mouth in hopes of delaying the inevitable sting. Before long, though, his eyes water in earnest. He mutters something inaudible and perhaps mildly dramatic, prompting the cook to hide a brief smile behind her sleeve. Near the hearth, a shallow clay dish sits warming on the edge of the fading embers. It holds a small amount of clarified butter, slowly melting back into liquid form. The scent is faint but rich, softening the sharper aromas of onion and grain. The cook takes a pinch of herbs, crushed mint and dried dill, their leaves brittle, and scatters them lightly into the dish. The herbs release their fragrance almost immediately, perfuming the room with the comforting scent of warmth and greenery. A merchant enters the doorway, pausing respectfully before stepping inside. He bows his head slightly, offering a polite greeting that the cook acknowledges with a quiet tilt of her chin. He holds a small bowl close to his chest, its contents concealed under a cloth. When he lifts the cloth, the cook sees dried apricots neatly arranged inside. Without speaking, he offers them forward. The cook accepts them with a small hum of approval. Dried fruit, rare in some seasons and precious in all, adds sweetness to the morning meal. She places them carefully beside the cutting board, saving them for later. In the corner opposite the hearth lies the raised baking platform, a flat clay surface warmed by the embers beneath it. The cook kneels beside it, pressing her palm gently against the clay, still warm, but not too hot. She nods to herself and takes a small ball of dough from a covered bowl nearby. The dough is soft and slightly tacky, smelling faintly of yeast and smoke. She presses it between her palms, flattening it into a thin round. The dough hisses softly when she places it onto the surface, its edges curling upward as heat touches them. The helper responsible for waking the fire appears now, carrying a small bundle of kindling in his arms. He kneels beside the hearth and brushes aside the ash with a practiced sweep. Beneath it, faint red glimmers reveal that the coals never fully died during the night. He leans close, blowing gently, coaxing them back to brightness. The coals glow deeper, reaching upward. He adds the kindling piece by piece, turning the faint embers into a small, steady flame. The room brightens slowly, shadows shifting as new light flickers across the walls. The warmth grows, though still soft, not yet the strong heat required for midday cooking. The cook adjusts the bread, flipping it once with her fingers, despite the heat. The flatbread darkens in gentle patches, its scent filling the kitchen with a warmth that draws even the sleepy travelers standing outside to glance toward the doorway. A traveler enters next, guided more by the aroma than by thought. He stands just inside, rubbing his hands together for warmth despite the rising heat. The cook acknowledges him with a brief glance, offering neither invitation or dismissal. He waits beside the wall, knowing that food emerges when the cook decides, not when hunger demands. By the water jar, another helper begins washing the clay cups collected from travelers the previous night. He dips each cup into a shallow basin of clean water, swirling it gently. The sound of water brushing against clay is soft, rhythmic. He sets them upside down on a reed mat to dry, watching as droplets gather on their rims before sliding downward. As the fire strengthens, the cook turns her attention to the pot of stew that rested overnight. She stirs it again, adding a small scoop of fresh water from a flask. The mixture loosens, softening into a smoother texture. Lentils, softened vegetables, and bits of last night's meat rise to the surface before settling again. The cook tastes a small spoonful. The flavor has deepened overnight, as though the ingredients whispered their stories to each other in the dark. She lifts a handful of the dried apricots, chopping them into small pieces and dropping them into the pot. Their sweetness will melt into the stew, adding a gentle richness. A traveler watching from the doorway inhales deeply, closing his eyes in quiet appreciation. At the far side of the room, a stone mortar rests beside the wall. A helper kneels before it, placing fresh herbs into the bowl. He begins grinding them with slow, even pressure. The pestle moves in a circular rhythm, soft crunches rising into the air with each turn. The smell of crushed herbs mixes with the scent of the melting butter and warming bread, forming a comforting blend that seems to sink into the walls themselves. Near the hearth, the first flatbread finishes cooking. The cook lifts it, slapping it lightly between her palms to release extra flour. The sound is soft but crisp, echoing gently in the warm room. She places the bread on a woven mat, covering it with a cloth to keep it warm. The helper assigned to the onions finishes his task as well, rubbing his eyes dramatically one last time before setting the chopped pieces in a bowl. The kitchen now feels awake, not bustling, not busy, but quietly alive in the way ancient kitchens always are. Fire crackles softly, bread warms, herbs release their scents into the gentle air. The pot simmers with slow, steady breath. Travelers gather just outside the doorway, stirred by the smells drifting past them. They speak in hushed tones, knowing that food arrives according to the kitchen's rhythm, not theirs. One traveler jokes that the cook must be part desert wind, slow to rise, but strong once awake. Another replies that the desert wind never made anything as comforting as morning stew. The cook gives no sign she has heard them, though the slight lift at the corner of her mouth suggests otherwise. Soon, bowls will be filled, soon. Warmth will spread from hearth to hands, from hands to travelers, from travelers into a day waiting beyond these walls. For now, the kitchen breathes quietly, allowing the morning to settle fully before offering its first meal. The rooms surrounding the Caravanserai's courtyard sit in a square formation, each one opening toward the center, like small doorways into private worlds. Their stone thresholds hold the marks of countless travelers, faint dips worn by sandals' slight discolorations where hands have brushed past over many seasons, and occasionally a carved symbol or scratched name left by someone who wished not to be forgotten. These rooms, though simple, carry the quiet dignity of a place that has sheltered traders, scholars, soldiers, wanderers, and hopeful pilgrims across centuries. The nearest room to the kitchen door stands partially open. As the morning warms, the air inside drifts outward, smelling faintly of woven mats, clay, and the coolness of shaded stone. The first rays of sunlight reach the doorway, but they do not enter far. The room prefers shadow, holding it protectively like something precious. A traveler steps from within, moving slowly, as if the room has not yet fully released him from its stillness. He stretches his arms above his head, the gentle crack of stiff joints echoing softly. Then, with a quiet yawn, he adjusts the cloth around his shoulders and begins preparing for the day's tasks. The room he leaves behind remains in half-darkness. Its walls, made of thick stone blocks, keep the heat at bay even when the courtyard grows warm. Inside, woven reed mats cover the floor in overlapping layers, their edges frayed from years of use. A low wooden platform serves as a bed, topped with a thin blanket that still holds the night's chill. Clay jugs of water stand near the wall, their surface is cool to the touch. A small shelf built into the stone holds simple belongings: a folded garment, a small knife, a string of beads, a scrap of parchment, a single feather used for writing or perhaps for luck. Farther along the walkway, another door opens slowly. An older traveler steps out, rubbing sleep from his eyes and muttering softly about the stiffness that long journeys gift so generously. He leans against the doorframe for a moment, breathing in the fresh morning air that carries the gentle aromas of herbs and bread rising from the kitchen. He listens to the faint rustle of camels shifting in the stable yard and the murmur of merchants checking their goods. These sounds form a kind of music, not lively, not arranged, but deeply familiar to those who live by roads rather than cities. Inside his room, the light reveals more details: a travel bag resting against the far wall, its leather worn but sturdy. A rolled piece of woolen cloth lies beside it, used as a pillow during the night. On the platform, another blanket is folded, its coarse texture softened by age. A clay lamp sits on a small niche in the wall, its wick charred from last night's flame. The faint scent of cooled oil lingers around it. The room's simplicity is its comfort. Nothing distracts, nothing demands attention. It offers rest, not luxury. A few steps away, a pair of siblings, travelers perhaps from a northern region, exit their room with quiet laughter. The younger one carries a small satchel of dates, offering one to the older as they walk. Their room still holds the imprint of their shared presence. Footprints on the mat, a jug half emptied, a woven cloak hung neatly on a peg. The cloak remains now, its fabric stirring slightly in the breeze that sneaks through the doorway. Its pattern reveals stories from their homeland, small diamond shapes strung together like clustered stars. Not all rooms stand open. Some remain closed, their occupants still asleep or simply enjoying the silence of morning before stepping into the day's tasks. Behind those doors lie scenes hidden from the courtyard, travelers lying on mats, listening to the faint sounds of voices outside. Hands reaching for a nearby water jug to take one last cool sip. Someone adjusting a strap on a travel pack by touch alone. These quiet, unseen moments are as much a part of the caravanserai as the courtyard's bustling trade. A faint stir of movement draws attention toward a cluster of 3 rooms near the far corner. There, a merchant kneels on the cool floor, sorting through a chest of goods he carried from a distant region across mountains. His room is slightly larger, likely reserved for those who bring heavier loads or who barter more valuable goods. He arranges items on a cloth spread before him: small metal tools, bolts of narrow woven fabric, a stack of parchment sheets wrapped with care. The merchant hums softly as he works, his voice blending with the quiet rhythm of the courtyard outside. In another room, a scholar sits on a small wooden stool, writing with a reed pen dipped in ink. His posture is straight, his breath slow and measured. The ink glides across the parchment, forming careful, curling symbols that hold meaning for him alone. His belongings are few: a worn leather book, a small bag of ink-making ingredients, and a single sandal set neatly beside the other, as if even his shoes required order. His room smells faintly of ink and parchment, a scent many travelers from distant lands recognize with quiet reverence. The scholar pauses occasionally, listening to the soft echo of footsteps in the walkway. He closes his eyes briefly, picturing the road ahead and the stories he will gather along it. Then he resumes writing, the steady scratching of his pen forming a kind of heartbeat inside the quiet room. Outside, the walkway gathers the morning light, creating a pattern of bright rectangles on the stone floor. A traveler steps across them slowly, as though savoring the warmth. He peeks inside his room once more, checking that nothing has been left behind or forgotten. A folded cloth, a half-finished letter, a pouch of coins. Each item carries importance when days of travel lie ahead. Satisfied, he closes the door gently, letting it rest against the frame without latching. At the far end of the walkway, one room stands with its door fully open. Inside, a young traveler sits cross-legged on a woven mat. He presses his palms together, then slowly lowers his hands to his knees, breathing in silence before the day begins. A thin thread of smoke rises from a small incense cone near the wall, carrying a scent that seems to merge with the stone itself, earthy, herbal, soothing. His water jug stands beside him, its clay cool to the touch. The mat beneath him is simple but clean, woven in narrow stripes that create a soft rhythm of color. The air inside these rooms is always a little cooler than the courtyard, especially in the early morning. The thick walls protect against heat and cold alike. Travelers often place their hands against the stone, feeling its ancient strength. The stone carries stories, though it does not speak them. It remembers each footfall, each whispered conversation, each moment of rest. Above the walkway, wooden beams stretch across the ceiling. A few small birds perched on them flutter their wings, hopping from one beam to another. Their tiny claws scratch lightly against the wood, making a barely noticeable sound. They watch the travelers with quiet curiosity, then return to pecking at whatever crumbs remain from last night's meal. The walkway itself forms a corridor of shifting light and shadow. As the sun climbs higher, the bright patches move slowly toward the opposite wall. The travelers adjust naturally, seeking comfort in the shade. One man stands with a cup of water, his hand resting against a pillar as he observes the courtyard. He sips slowly, savoring the coolness on his tongue. For a moment, he looks almost entirely at peace, as though the journey behind him and the journey ahead both fade into the gentle stillness of this moment. Within the rooms, tiny details reveal their inhabitants: a carefully folded cloth, a pair of sandals arranged side by side, a small wooden charm tied to a bedpost, a scrap of food wrapped in cloth, a reed pen placed precisely on a shelf. Each detail reflects a traveler's life condensed into a small, temporary space. For one night, perhaps two, these rooms become homes, places where bodies rest, thoughts settle, and the dust of the road finally loosens from weary limbs. As the morning settles fully into the courtyard, the rooms begin to empty. Travelers retrieve their belongings, merchants tuck precious items back into chests, and those who write or pray finish their quiet rituals. One by one, doorways shift from shadowed pockets of stillness to open frames through which life flows back into the courtyard. But even as travelers step out into the brightening day, the rooms hold their quiet dignity, small stone sanctuaries that cradle rest within the ancient rhythm of the Silk Road. In the shaded arches along the southern side of the courtyard, the merchants begin to settle into the work that defines their days. Unlike the early ritual of unloading, which is shaped by dust, travel weariness, and stiff limbs, the act of examining goods and negotiating value unfolds with a kind of deliberate patience. Trade is, after all, the heart of the Caravanserai, the quiet, steady pulse that moves through its chambers and corridors. The stone beneath the arches keeps a gentle coolness even as the sun climbs higher. Shadows stretch out in long, soft bands, giving the merchants a refuge where they can lay out their goods without fear of direct heat damaging dyes, oils, or parchment. The sounds here differ from the rest of the courtyard, the slow crackle of unfurling cloth, the faint clink of metal tools, the careful tapping of fingernails, evaluating the firmness of pottery glazes, and the murmured voices drifting like soft threads through the heavy morning air. A trader from a western region, on a woven mat spread across the stone. Before him lies an array of gleaming copper bowls, hammered so thin that the sunlight glints along their edges like liquid. He lifts each bowl in turn, tilting it to inspect the curvature for subtle imperfections. The bowls ring with a faint, musical tone when tapped, a sound that travels only a few paces before fading into the quiet. A traveler from the north watches with interest, crouching beside the merchant and listening to the metallic notes. After a quiet exchange, the northern traveler selects a smaller bowl, testing its balance in his palm, weighing not only the metal but the worth of the journey it took to arrive here. Nearby, two merchants from distant cities sit opposite each other, with a thick roll of patterned silk between them. The silk spills out in ripples, each fold catching the light differently: pale silver, deep indigo, muted green. One merchant runs his fingers over the surface, feeling the fine weave that must have taken weeks of work. The other watches him closely, his eyes alert and steady. Though their voices remain calm, their conversation has the quiet intensity of a chess match. They speak in low tones, weaving threads of price, distance, die cost, and trust into a delicate negotiation. Neither wishes to offend, neither wishes to concede more than necessary. They move slowly, their words punctuated by thoughtful pauses. The negotiation is less about money and more about respect, a recognition of skills, distances traveled, and the fragile networks of trust along the Silk Road. Farther along the shaded walkway, an elderly man sits cross-legged with a set of lapis beads spread before him. The stones glow with a deep blue hue, speckled with gold flecks that shimmer like tiny stars suspended in twilight. The elderly man inspects the beads with the calm precision of someone who has held such stones for decades. He turns them gently between his fingers, feeling 4 cracks invisible to the eye. Occasionally, he lifts a bead toward the light, allowing it to glow as though touched by a hidden sun. A young merchant approaches with reverence, placing a small box of incense beside him. The fragrance opens slowly into the air, weaving soft curls of smoke between them. Their negotiation barely rises above a whisper, shaped by respect for both the stones and the years the elder has spent carrying them. Not all dealings involve precious goods. Some merchants carry bundles of simple woven baskets, their patterns understated but sturdy. A basket maker unravels a portion of his bundle, showing the flexible reeds and tight stitching to a potential bier. The bier presses the rim gently, checking how much weight the basket can carry without bending. They discuss durability, softness, and whether a large basket can last through another season of travel. Their conversation is light, touched with moments of humor. One mentions that his last basket survived a camel stepping directly onto it, an impressive claim met with raised brows and a doubtful nod. A little farther down the walkway, a woman selling medicinal items arranges jars of dried herbs, powdered roots, and small metal tools used for preparing mixtures. She lifts the lid of one jar and wafts the scent toward a traveler with a sore wrist. The aroma is sharp, earthy, with a hint of bitterness. The traveler grimaces slightly, then laughs, saying that anything which smells strong enough to chase away desert spirits might cure his wrist as well. The woman smiles thinly, taping a small cloth around the jar before handing it to him with instructions spoken in a slow, measured tone. Across the walkway, another merchant displays embroidered shawls, their patterns stitched with fine threads that shimmer softly when moved. He drapes one across his arm, showing how the cloth breathes in the heat and retains warmth when the desert night grows cold. A visitor fingers the edge of the shawl, noting the softness of the fibers. They discuss the origins of the dye, whether it came from crushed flowers, bark, or imported pigment powders carried in small, precious pouches across mountains. The scribe of the Caravanserai settles beneath one of the columns, balancing a wooden board on his knees. His tools are arranged beside him: a pot of ink, reed pens trimmed to crisp points, pieces of parchment weighed down with small stones. Travelers approach him to record transactions, write letters to family, or copy down prices and weights agreed upon during the morning's negotiations. The scribe moves with graceful steadiness, his pen dancing across the parchment in loops and arcs. His voice remains soft when confirming names or numbers. He does not rush. Writing is, to him, an act of quiet precision. A passerby comments that the scribe's handwriting like the wine tracing patterns in the sand. The scribe offers a faint smile without looking up, continuing his work in calm, unbroken strokes. Not all negotiations progress smoothly. At one end of the walkway, a pair of merchants debate over the quality of a clay jar. The jar is simple but well-formed, its surface decorated with faint geometric patterns. One merchant insists that the glaze is uneven. The other argues that such irregularities prove it was handmade by a respected craftsman rather than produced quickly in bulk. Their voices remain low, but their gestures grow animated. At one point, one lightly taps the jar's surface, causing a faint ring that reverberates through the shaded space. A nearby traveler snorts softly, amused by the intensity of their argument over something as humble as a jar. But on the Silk Road, even the humblest object carries weight. It may hold water in a desert, or protect precious spices from moisture, or store grain on a long journey. A young merchant from a southern region finished arranging his goods, delicate glass beads shaped like small droplets, each catching the light in a different way. He sets them out in clusters based on color: clear like morning light, amber like desert sand, pale blue like distant mountains. A group of travelers drift closer, drawn by the quiet shimmer. One of them picks up a bead between finger and thumb, surprised by its lightness. Another grins, holding a pale blue bead against the sky as if comparing shades. For a moment, the walkway fills with small murmurs of appreciation. Yet in all this activity, the pace remains gentle. The Caravanserai is not a market where crowds push and voices rise. It is a crossroads, a place where trade is shaped by the slow rhythm of desert life. Negotiations take time, and agreements unfold like unfolding cloth, a little at a time, revealing more only when both sides lean in with patience. Occasionally, a breeze passes through the walkway, carrying with it the coolness of shaded stone mixed with the warm scent of the courtyard. Cloth flutters lightly, the aroma of herbs from the kitchen drifts past. A merchant pauses mid-sentence, closing his eyes briefly in appreciation of the breeze before continuing as if nothing happened. Even the most serious negotiation allows a moment of stillness. One camel, resting nearby, decides to punctuate the calm by emitting a remarkably loud groan. The sound echoes with surprising enthusiasm off the stone, causing several merchants to pause and glance over. One shakes his head in amusement, remarking under his breath that the animal must want to join the bargaining. Another replies that the camel would likely demand better prices than most travelers. A ripple of quiet laughter follows, drifting like a soft wave through the shaded arch. Shadows shift as the sun climbs, the cool bands narrowing slowly. Merchants begin repositioning themselves further back into the shade, siding their goods with them. The walkway holds all these movements: the opening of a cloth bundle, the soft roll of a scroll, the tapping of fingers against pottery, the murmur of agreement sealed with a nod. Within these arches, trade becomes more than exchange. It becomes a quiet ritual, a meeting of distant worlds beneath one shared roof of stone. In the quiet corner of the courtyard, where sunlight filters through a lattice of wooden beams, the scribe begins his day's steady work. Though he has already taken down notes and prices for merchants under the shade of the southern walkway, this small nook is where he prefers to settle himself for more delicate writing. The spot offers just enough space for his wooden board, his pouch of reeds, and the sheets of parchment he guards with the same care others reserve for silk or spices. He lowers himself onto a woven mat, smoothing its surface with the palm of his hand. The mat carries the faint scent of dried reeds, warmed by sunlight, and beneath it, the stone floor retains a coolness that rises into the scribe's legs, grounding him gently. He arranges his tools with ritual precision, the ink pot placed slightly to the right, the trimmed reed pens laid horizontally, the parchment weighed down at its corners with pebble-sized stones smoothed flat by many fingers over many years. A faint breeze passes through the courtyard, lifting the corner of one parchment sheet before it settles again under the stone. The scribe reaches out and presses the edge softly, as though reassuring the parchment that it is safe. Then, dipping the reed pen lightly into the ink, he draws the first line of the day. The ink, rich and dark, glides across the surface with a smoothness that betrays the scribe's practiced hand. Writing, for him, is more than a task. It is an act of quiet balance between ink, reed, and breath. Travelers approach him one by one, each with their own requests, each bringing a small corner of the world with them. A merchant kneels beside him first, sliding a small purse of coins forward, along with a folded list of transactions from the early morning dealings. The scribe unfolds the parchment, his eyes scanning the lines. With steady strokes, he copies the prices, quantities, and descriptions onto a new, clean sheet. He pauses occasionally to confirm a weight or a measurement with the merchant, who points toward his bundles with soft gestures. Their voices remain low, almost swallowed by the stillness of the courtyard. When the scribe finishes, he ties a small knot in the string binding the merchant's document, a knot that signals it has been recorded with care. The merchant nods with quiet satisfaction before slipping the document into his satchel. As he leaves, the scribe cleans the tip of his reed with a small cloth, wiping away the excess ink in slow, deliberate motions. A group of young travelers approaches next, carrying a letter written in hurried, uneven lines. They ask him to rewrite it more neatly so it can be sent along with the next caravan traveling west. The scribe scans the letter, reading the young traveler's words of greeting to his family, descriptions of mountains crossed, markets visited, and the hope of returning home safely. The scribe dips his reed again, copying the letter with precise, flowing strokes. The young travelers watch him work, their expressions softening as they see their clumsy script transformed into graceful lines. One whispers to another that the scribe's writing looks almost like embroidered patterns. The scribe's lips curve in a faint, knowing smile, though he keeps his eyes on the parchment. Once the letter is complete, he sprinkles a fine layer of sand across the fresh ink. The grains absorb the moisture, preventing smudges. After a moment, he tilts the parchment carefully, letting the sand fall away into a shallow wooden tray. The ink remains perfect, crisp and steady, just as the scribe intended. The travelers bow slightly before leaving, clutching the letter with renewed pride. A healer steps toward him now, carrying a small roll of parchment filled with notes on herbs she gathered during recent travels. She asks him to copy a section into a separate sheet so she can gift it to another healer traveling east. The knowledge contained in these notes, properties of roots, uses of dried leaves, and mixtures for treating wounds, deserves preservation. The scribe spreads the parchment out gently, nodding with appreciation for its care. As he writes, he pauses briefly at a description of a dried red root that can be used both for calming fever and for dyeing cloth. The dual purpose makes him hum softly in recognition. Practical knowledge like this is the true treasure of the road. The healer stands with her hands folded, watching the ink take shape. When the scribe finishes, she offers him a small bundle of dried mint as payment. He accepts it with a quiet nod, placing the bundle beside his board. Its scent freshens the air around him, drifting in gentle waves. A pause settles over the courtyard. The scribe stretches slowly, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness that writing inevitably brings. His joints crack softly, echoing the earlier sound made by the traveler leaving his room. A chuckle escapes him, barely more than a breath, as he reflects on how age and writing both insist on leaving marks on the body. Then comes a different kind of request. A trader from a distant region kneels before him with a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside lies a delicate brass weight shaped like a bird, its wings extended as though in mid-flight. The trader asks the scribe to record measurements of several similar weights, along with markings on their undersides. The scribe turns the tiny weight in his hands, admiring the craftsmanship. Brasswork from that region is known to be both beautiful and precise, and collectors often seek such pieces for their own balances. He notes each detail carefully, drawing a small sketch in the margin, a privilege he grants only when the object before him seems worthy of it. As he works, a camel resting near the edge of the courtyard emits a deep, unprompted groan that reverberates across the stones. The scribe pauses mid-stroke, closing his eyes with an expression that suggests he is reconsidering the life choices that placed him in earshot of the animal. A few merchants nearby exchange amused glances. One quietly murmurs that even the camels have opinions about the paperwork of trade. The scribe exhales through his nose, a sound halfway between resignation and a laugh, before returning to his writing. Later, a traveler approaches the scribe with a different request, a letter not to be sent forward, but to be left behind. The traveler explains softly that the journey ahead is uncertain, and he wishes to leave a message in case he does not return. The scribe listens with respectful stillness. He takes a new sheet of parchment and writes the traveler's words with steady strokes, preserving them exactly as spoken. When he finishes, he seals the letter with a small piece of wax from his pouch. The traveler thanks him quietly, placing a hand over his own heart before entrusting the letter to the caravanserai keeper. The scribe watches him walk away, feeling the weight of unspoken stories merging with the desert air. Around midday, the sun begins to push warm beams deeper into the courtyard, reaching the lattice above the scribe's head. Light flickers across the parchment in shifting, irregular patterns. The scribe adjusts his position, sliding slightly back into the shade, so the ink will not dry too quickly. The warmth touches his hands, easing the stiffness in his fingers. He breathes in slowly, appreciating the subtle comfort that sunlight brings even during long hours of work. Occasionally, merchants stop by to ask the scribe to verify the authenticity of a seal or a signature. His knowledge of scripts from distant regions makes him invaluable in such matters. He examines each wax impression, noting the depth of lines, the style of carving, and the faint markings unique to each craftsman. Sometimes, a seal is genuine, sometimes it carries hints of alteration. He delivers his judgment in quiet tones, always with calm honesty. A few merchants grumble when the news is not what they hope to hear, but most accept his word with respect. On the Silk Road, trust is a currency as valuable as gold. As the sun rises higher, the courtyard fills with a soft chorus, the rustle of pages, the murmur of voices negotiating, the steady chewing of camels, the distant crackle of the kitchen fire. Through it all, the scribe continues his work, shaping the day's transactions into neat rows of ink that will guide travelers across mountains, deserts, and plains. He works not with urgency, but with the quiet certainty of someone who understands his role. He preserves what others risk to carry. He records what might otherwise vanish. He listens, writes, guards, and witnesses. In the cool shade beneath the lattice of wood, the scribe's ink becomes the thread that ties the vast silk road together, line by steady line, stroke by deliberate stroke. By late morning, the caravanserai begins to slip gently into the grip of the midday heat. That slow, inevitable hush that settles over desert places once the sun climbs high enough to command silence. The courtyard, once alive with footsteps, murmurs, and shifting bundles, grows still in a way that feels almost ceremonial. Even the voices of merchants grow quieter, softened not by fatigue, but by a shared understanding. Midday is a time when the world should move more slowly. The sun pulls over the courtyard like molten brass, its brightness pressing against the high walls and casting sharp edges along every shadow. Heat gathers first in the stones underfoot, warming them until they radiate a steady, enveloping warmth. It rises next into the air, shimmering faintly above the ground, waves of distortion that turn the world briefly fluid at the edges. Anyone walking across the courtyard feels the temperature shift around them, like stepping from one breath of air into another that's slightly hotter. Most travelers retreat into the shade willingly. The covered walkways around the courtyard become long, narrow sanctuaries where the air remains cooler, protected by stone and wood. Here, bodies fold into more restful shapes. A man leans against a column, his legs stretched out. A woman sits cross-legged with her back against a wall, eyes half closed. A merchant rests on a woven mat, fanning himself slowly with a piece of parchment. A pair of siblings lie side by side, sharing a single water jug between them. Even the animals step into the rhythm of midday restraint. The camels in the stable yard shift only when necessary, lowering their long necks to rest on folded legs. Their breaths deepen, their eyes narrowing into thin, patient slits. One camel emits a long, rolling groan, not born of discomfort, but simple commentary on the heat, as though reminding everyone that desert living requires a certain dramatic flair. A stable boy passing by gives the camel a tired look, remarking softly that the animal has opinions about every hour of the day. The camel flicks an ear in reply, unimpressed. In the kitchen, the fire is dampened into a gentler glow. The cook opens one of the narrow windows to let the heat escape, though it does so reluctantly, clinging to the room before drifting upward. The pot of stew rests on the edge of the hearth, simmering just enough to release a slow ribbon of fragrant steam. A helper kneels by a clay jar of water, dipping a ladle into its cool depths and drinking in small, careful sips. He offers the ladle to a traveler waiting near the doorway. The traveler accepts it gratefully, raising the ladle to his lips with a soft sigh of relief. The water in the courtyard fountain remains the coolest place of all, sheltered by the play of light and shadow cast by the high walls. Travelers gather around it, dipping claws into the water and pressing them to their necks or wrists. A man kneels and splashes water onto his face, letting the droplets fall from his chin to the stones below. The sound is quiet, rhythmic, a small, soothing counterpoint to the hum of heat above. Nearby, a group of merchants fans themselves with folded scraps of parchment. One of them insists that the heat is no worse than that of northern plains in summer. Another counters that the desert sun is more persistent, as though it negotiates with no one. A third adds that at least the desert heat is honest. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. Their soft debate continues lazily, the words stretching into long spaces between sentences. Even the insects respond to the rising heat. A few tiny flies hover lazily near the shade, their movements slow, unhurried. A lone ant follows a determined path along the courtyard's edge, seemingly unaffected by the heat at all. A traveler watches it for a moment and murmurs that perhaps ants are immune to discomfort. His companion replies that if so, they are smarter than most travelers. The exchange draws a few soft laughs from those nearby, breaking the stillness without disturbing it. In a corner of the walkway, the scribe rests his tools and stretches backward, letting the stone wall support his tired spine. He rubs the ink from his fingers with a cloth that long ago surrendered any hope of remaining clean. The warmth loosens the stiffness in his shoulders, though he keeps his parchments tucked safely under a small stone to prevent the heat from curling their edges. His eyes drift shut for a moment, not asleep, just at rest. Even a scribe, with all his precision and focus, surrenders to the slow pull of midday. Across the courtyard, several travelers settle into shared stillness. One lies on his side with his arm tucked under his head. Another reclines with his back against a satchel, using it as a makeshift cushion. The long shadows beneath the walkway offer just enough coolness for rest. Feet that spent the morning walking now stretch out, toes pointing toward the shade. Hands that spent hours sorting goods now lie open on woven mats, palms relaxed. The high walls cast their own influence on the noon silence. Their surfaces absorb the heat, turning warm to the touch, but the thickness of the stone keeps the interior spaces cool enough for rest. Faint cracks in the walls allow slivers of light to creep across the floors, creating shifting patterns that move slowly throughout the afternoon. The walls seem to breathe with the heat, exhaling warmth back into the courtyard with every passing moment. A few travelers still brave the sun, stepping across the open space to reach the opposite walkway. Their sandals slap against the stone with gentle echoes. They move slowly, heads bowed slightly, as though in respect for the sun's authority. One pauses halfway across the courtyard, squinting at the rippling air above the stone. He shakes his head softly, then quickens his pace toward the shade on the other side. The moment he steps beneath the walkway, he exhales deeply, as though the simple act of reaching shade grants a small victory. A merchant in the corner unwraps a cloth and reveals a small pile of figs, dried but still sweet. He offers one to a traveler sitting nearby, who accepts it with a grateful nod. The fig's sweetness cuts through the heaviness of the heat, offering a brief spark of energy. Another merchant passes by and asks quietly if there are more figs to trade. The first merchant shakes his head, pointing out that these are for sharing, not bargaining. The traveler laughs softly, remarking that generosity, too, is part of the Silk Road's ancient customs. From deeper within the Caravanserai, the creak of a wooden door echoes down the walkway. A pair of workers emerges, carrying a large clay jar suspended between them on a wooden pole. The jar is newly filled with water from the underground cistern, cool, untouched by the midday heat. They carry it slowly, mindful of the jar's weight and the preciousness of its contents. As they pass, several travelers watch them with near reverence, for water at midday feels like the difference between comfort and exhaustion. When the workers set the jar down near the fountain, a small gathering forms almost immediately. Travelers refill their cups, splash water onto their faces, or simply stand near the jar to feel the faint coolness that rises from it. One traveler presses both hands to the jar's side and closes his eyes, savoring the brief relief. A companion tells him not to fall asleep standing there. The traveler responds that if sleep comes while touching cool clay, it should be considered a blessing. Midday does not erase movement entirely. It simply slows it. The Caravanserai breathes in longer strokes now, its rhythm softened into a gentle lull. Outside the walls, the desert lies in shimmering silence, but within them, the courtyard becomes a haven of shade, stillness, and shared rest. The heat presses down like a heavy blanket, but it does not bring discomfort alone. It brings a pause, a moment for travelers to gather strength, for animals to settle deeply, for merchants to rest their minds, and for the ancient walls to hold everything in quiet balance. As midday softens into early afternoon, the Caravanserai begins to stir again, not with the hurried energy of morning, but with the gentle, unhurried rhythm of travelers returning to themselves after rest. The heat remains heavy in the courtyard, but the air nearest the shaded walkways cools enough for quiet conversation to drift into the stillness. It is during this slow stretch of the day that stories begin to unfurl in the shaded corners, shared like offerings between travelers who may never meet again once the dust of the road separates them. A group gathers beneath one of the archways where the shadow stretches longest, its outline shaped like a curved blade across the stone. Here, several travelers have settled onto woven mats, forming a loose semicircle. Some lean back against the stone wall with legs outstretched. Others sit cross-legged, hands resting loosely in their laps. The atmosphere is light, softened by the lingering warmth and the quiet stillness that follows rest. A clay jug of water stands in the center, the cup resting on its rim waiting for the next pair of hands to claim it. An older traveler with a weathered face begins the first tale. His voice carries the slow, steady confidence of someone who has recounted its details many times. He speaks of a storm that overtook his caravan near a mountain pass, a storm so sudden and fierce that the camels refused to move, choosing instead to kneel in the snow, as though protesting the very idea of progress. The travelers laugh softly at this. Anyone who has dealt with camels knows their steadfast refusal to cooperate during unfortunate weather is entirely believable. One listener murmurs that camels seem to believe the world should adjust to them, not the other way around. A few nods and quiet chuckles follow. The older traveler continues, describing how the storm left frost on the camels for a strange and beautiful sight under lantern light. His voice lowers when he recounts how one lantern blew out, leaving them with only the dim glow of reflected snow. For a moment, as he describes the hush of falling flakes, even the heat of the desert courtyard feels cooler. When he finishes, the jug passes to another traveler, a woman with a shawl patterned in sweeping, intricate lines. She takes a sip before sharing her own story, this one from a distant market city. She describes a festival where lanterns hung from every archway, their flames flickering like captured stars. Traders from dozens of regions filled the streets, their goods stacked high. Strings of beads, colored powders, carved wooden toys, and bundles of herbs whose scents drifted through the crowd like wandering spirits. Her voice softens as she recalls music rising from a nearby square, a blend of drums, flutes, and voices weaving together until the night shimmered with sound. The group listens in stillness, captivated by the distant world she conjures. One traveler sighs that festivals sound far more pleasant than storms. Another replies that festivals can be overwhelming in their own ways, particularly when trying to keep track of coins in a city where pickpockets move faster than desert wind. Soft amusement flutters through the group again. Not far from this circle, another gathering forms. A merchant sits with his back against a pillar, polishing a brass cup with a piece of cloth. A younger traveler kneels beside him, asking questions about the markings on the cup, tiny lines carved into the metal with careful precision. The merchant explains that these marks show where the cup was made, the craftsman's family, and the region's emblem. He runs his finger along one of the carvings, tracing the shape of a stylized bird with outstretched wings. The younger traveler leans closer, marveling at how even everyday objects carry worlds within their surfaces. A trader passing by pauses to join the conversation, adding that in some regions, artisans embed small imperfections intentionally, believing that only the divine should create something truly flawless. The group reflects quietly on this idea, each turning it over in the mind like a smooth stone. A traveler jokes that by that standard, the uneven stitching in his saddle is a sacred piece of work. The others laugh softly, though the merchant polishing the cup advises him to mend his saddle before the next long journey. Humor settles between them like a warm blanket. In another corner, two travelers sit close together, sharing dried fruit from a small pouch. They speak of their families in a distant oasis town, describing palm groves heavy with dates and canals lined with cool stone. Their voices are low, filled with the tenderness of memory. One describes the sound of wind moving through the groves, the leaves rustling like the softest waves. The other speaks of evenings when the entire town gathers to recite stories handed down through generations. The courtyard seems to lean in closer, as though listening too. A little farther down the walkway, a storyteller from a mountainous region begins describing an encounter with a creature he claims to have seen near a remote pass. His listeners raise skeptical brows as he describes long shadows, glowing eyes, and footprints wider than a camel's stride. The storyteller swears he speaks truth, though the mischievous glint in his eye suggests otherwise. One traveler remarks that such creatures conveniently appear only when no one else is watching. Another replies that perhaps the creatures simply dislike crowds. The storyteller throws up his hands, half in jest, insisting that travelers today lack imagination. The laughter that follows rolls outward, brushing the courtyard with brief, bright warmth. A group of merchants sits along a low stone ledge, comparing road routes in soft murmurs. They speak of narrow passes where winds slice between cliffs, of wide plains where hoofbeats echo 4 miles, of valleys where rivers cut through the earth like shimmering threads. They debate which routes offer the safest path this season, which settlements are most likely to welcome caravans, and which rumors of bandits hold weight. Though their voices remain calm, their eyes carry the alertness of those accustomed to reading both maps and danger. One merchant unfolds a worn scrap of parchment, tracing a narrow path with the tip of his finger. He explains that in his youth, the route near a certain gorge was considered safe, but the river has since shifted, making the crossing treacherous. Another merchant nods solemnly, adding that landscapes change, surely as people do. A third observes that travelers need to adapt, though he notes that some camels refuse to adapt at all. The camels resting nearby grunt in soft disagreement. Under one of the archways, a traveler unpacks a small wooden instrument, its body shaped like a gently curved almond. He plucks a string lightly, sending a soft vibration into the air. The note lingers, delicate and warm. He adjusts the tuning pegs with small, precise movements, then plucks again. A few travelers turn their heads, listening. Music spreads into the courtyard like slow-moving water seeping into cracks. The sound fills the shaded spaces, slipping into the stillness without disturbing it. He begins playing a simple melody, slow, thoughtful, shaped like a memory returning home. The notes drift across the courtyard, brushing past sleeping camels and resting merchants, rising and falling in gentle arcs. The melody gathers listeners without calling them. Some close their eyes. Others watch the musician's fingers move across the strings with steady grace. Even the air seems to quiet itself further, as though making space for the song. In this soft gathering of stories, time loosens its grip. Voices overlap gently, memories unfold like worn maps, and strangers find the warmth of familiarity. The caravanserai becomes not just a place of rest, but a vessel for the stories carried on weary feet from mountains, plains, deserts, and distant seas. As shadows lengthen and the heat begins its slow retreat, the stories settle into the corners of the courtyard, woven into the air like threads of silk, shared for a moment, remembered for a lifetime. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, the caravanserai shifts once more into motion. The oppressive midday heat loosens its hold, drawing a long, quiet sigh from the courtyard walls. Shadows stretch outward, cooling the stones step by step. With this easing of light, the travelers rise from their shaded resting places, brushing dust from their clothes, stretching arms stiffened by stillness, and gathering the energy needed to prepare for the coming evening. The courtyard, moments ago hushed, awakens with a gentle kind of bustle. Nothing hurried, nothing sharp, just a soft swelling of movement that flows like cooled sand through the narrow spaces between the arches. Under the long shadows, merchants return to their bundles, checking knots, lifting lids, reshaping the small collections they assembled earlier in the day. The sounds are faint, the swish of cloth being folded, the clink of pottery against pottery, the muted knock of wooden chests being shifted into position. Along the western walkway, a merchant crouches beside a chest bound with leather straps. He loosens the ties carefully, adjusting the goods inside to ensure nothing shifts during the next journey. Rolls of fabric, tightly bound earlier, are now repacked with more space between them to account for cooling air that will tighten the cloth. The merchant hums a slow, contemplative tune as he works, occasionally pausing to lift a piece of woven wool and examine the dye under the fading light. The colors look different now, deeper, calmer, softened by dusk. Nearby, a pair of travelers repack their bags with the practiced coordination of people who have spent many seasons on the road. One folds blankets into neat rectangles, arranging them at the bottom of a woven sack. The other checks the stitching along the edges of a leather pouch, tightening one seam with a curved needle. Their movements are slow but purposeful, shaped by routines that have carried them across lands too wide for one lifetime to fully know. In the stable yard, the camels begin to stir again. Their bodies, cooled by shade, shift with renewed energy. A stable hand walks between them, tying ropes loosely around their halters in preparation for the evening feeding. One camel rises with surprising grace, lifting its long neck and blinking as though seeing the courtyard anew. Another stretches its legs in a manner best described as indignant elegance, producing a deep groan that echoes off the stone walls. The stable hand pats its flank, whispering to it with the resigned affection of someone well accustomed to camel opinions. Large clay troughs are filled again with fresh water drawn earlier from the cistern. The camels lap at the water noisily, their long eyelashes casting delicate shadows across their faces. A few younger animals jostle for position, but the older camels shift their weight with such casual authority that order is restored without a sound from the humans. Dust rises with each movement, catching the slanted evening light in a slow, luminous drift. Back in the courtyard, a figure kneels beside a small fire pit that was empty earlier in the day. He places several pieces of dry wood into the pit-thin branches first, then thicker ones, arranging them with careful intention. When the sun lowers enough that its light no longer reaches the center of the courtyard, he strikes flint against steel. Sparks leap into the air, catching briefly before settling onto the kindling. After a moment, thin orange flames begin to unfurl, curling around the wood like warm breath. Other travelers gather around similar fire pits in the walkway corners. Fires will not blaze high, they are meant for warmth and light, not cooking, but their glow adds a comforting presence to the caravanserai's stone embrace. A faint smell of burning wood drifts upward, mingling with the lingering sense of herbs, leather, and coal dust. As the fires crackle softly, the cook emerges from the kitchen, holding a large clay bowl. Inside are chopped vegetables, onions, herbs, and squash ready to be added to the evening pot. She stands near a raised platform and pours the contents carefully into a simmering mixture. The aroma rising from the pot grows richer, deeper, thickening the air with the promise of supper. A few travelers drift toward the kitchen's doorway, drawn unconsciously by the scent. The cook gives them a look that sits somewhere between tolerance and mild warning. They retreat respectfully, though not without a hopeful glance at the pot. Under one of the shaded arches, a group of merchants begins tying bundles for the night. Their rope loops are practiced and secure, winding around chests and parcels in steady, repeated motions. One merchant tests his knot by pulling it tight with both hands. It holds. He nods with quiet pride. There is beauty in a well-tied knot, especially one that must withstand long miles of uneven road. Across the courtyard, a younger merchant struggles with a stubborn strap on one of his saddlebags. After several tries and a few muttered frustrations, an elder traveler steps beside him and demonstrates a simpler, sturdier way to secure the strap. The younger merchant watches carefully, then repeats the motion. It works. He smiles with genuine relief. The elder nods once, adopting the calm posture of someone who long ago learned that mentorship on the road is more valuable than silver. A few travelers sit along the stone ledge near the gate, repairing clothing worn thin by dust and travel. One mends a tear in his tunic, threading a needle through the fabric in small, patient stitches. Another reinforces the sole of a sandal with layers of woven fiber. These repairs are not rushed. Each stitch is a small investment in survival and comfort, and the quiet evening makes space for such care. Across the courtyard, the storyteller from earlier lifts his instrument again, tuning the strings with practiced fingers. This time he plays a melody-shaped fuduska, tune that stretches long, soft notes into the growing cool of the evening. The music drifts across the courtyard, weaving between the arches, curling around the firelight, settling gently near the ears of anyone who chooses to listen. Even the camels seem to pause, tilting their heads as though recognizing the rhythm. As the light fades further, the caravanserai fills with low voices. Travelers call softly to one another, checking the position of their goods, arranging small tasks, sharing small updates. These exchanges float like softened echoes, light enough not to disturb the growing calm. One merchant counts his coins carefully beneath the shade of a column, rolling each piece between his fingers before placing it into a small cloth purse. A traveler watching nearby notes that he has counted each coin at least 3 times. The merchant responds that 3 times is merely the beginning. Coins are like clever birds, always ready to fly away if not watched properly. The traveler laughs, agreeing that some of his coins have wings of their own. A faint breeze stirs the hanging cloths, fluttering them gently. Dust rises in small clouds from the courtyard floor, catching the glow of firelight as though gleaming from within. The air cools slightly, offering the first sign that night is moving closer. This hour between heat and nightfall belongs to preparation. To small repairs, to soft conversations, to firelight settling into stone. No one rushes. No one needs to. The road will demand its pace soon enough. For now, the caravanserai becomes a vessel of readiness, a place where travelers wrap up the day's labors and gather the quiet strength needed for the night ahead. As the last threads of sunlight slip behind the distant horizon, the caravanserai slowly exhales into evening. The courtyard, once shimmering with heat, now begins to cool, gathering pockets of soft shadow that creep along the stones like gentle folds of dark fabric. Fires glow in small clusters beneath the archways, their flames reflecting off pottery, metal cups, and the watchful eyes of camels who seem mildly offended that night has arrived without their permission. This is the hour when the smell of supper begins to weave itself through the air. Near the kitchen, the cook lifts the heavy lid of a large clay pot, releasing a slow, fragrant breath of steam that curls upward in lazy spirals. The aroma drifts into the courtyard rich, warm, layered with herbs that soften throughout the afternoon. Lentils simmer with chopped vegetables. A few precious pieces of meat add deeper flavor. The scent is comforting, earthy, the kind of smell that travels long distances along the Silk Road because memory carries it farther than feet ever could. A helper steps forward with a clay ladle and stirs the pot gently. The surface ripples, revealing pieces of squash, softened onion, and grains expanded from the long heat. He inhales deeply, eyes closing. When he opens them again, several travelers are standing quietly nearby, perhaps by coincidence, perhaps not. Their posture is casual, but their eyes linger on the pot with unmistakable longing. The cook glances at them with a look that is both warning and warmth. They retreat one respectful step. Though none of them leave entirely, hope, after all, is stronger than hunger. At the edge of the courtyard, a merchant unwraps a small bundle containing flatbread baked earlier in the day. The bread is warm again after resting near the fire, its surface darkened in patches where it touched the clay oven. He breaks it into pieces and passes them around to a small group seated beside him. The bread cracks softly in his hands, the sound echoing faintly like dry twigs snapping underfoot. A traveler accepts a piece with gratitude, holding it close to his face before taking a slow bite. The warmth spreads gently across his palate, carrying the subtle memories of roasted grain and smoke. Along the northern walkway, a pot of rice cooks in a smaller fire pit. The grains plump and soften, releasing steam scented with a pinch of saffron that the merchant overseeing the pot guards as fiercely as he guards his coins. A traveler nearby inhales deeply and remarks softly that saffron smells like a sunrise caught inside a grain of rice. The merchant snorts an unimpressed but faintly amused sound and explains that saffron smells like money. Still, when the rice finishes cooking, he shares it with those around him, offering each traveler a small, respectful portion. In another corner, someone roasts a handful of chickpeas in a shallow pan, stirring them so they do not burn. Their earthy fragrance mingles with the deeper scents rising from the kitchen. A few children, sons and daughters of traveling families, watch the roasting process with wide eyes, hoping to sneak a taste. When the cook finally allows one to try a single roasted chickpea, the child's expression lights up in triumph, so bright it competes with the fires. Across the courtyard, the evening meal continues to grow. Someone brings out dried herbs ground earlier in the day, sprinkling them into a dish with slow, thoughtful movements. A merchant unwraps a small packet of dates from a distant oasis town, passing one to a weary traveler who has not eaten since morning. Another traveler offers a piece of dried apricot to a stranger sitting alone. The stranger accepts it quietly, murmuring thanks in a voice softened by exhaustion. These small offerings travel through the courtyard like shared gestures of trust, proof that food binds people together, even in places where paths meet only briefly. The cook begins serving the stew. She ladles thick portions into clay bowls, handing each bowl across the wooden counter with the steady rhythm of someone who knows exactly how to feed a weary caravan. The bowls are simple and painted, slightly uneven, rims chipped from long use, but the travelers hold them as though they are precious. The heat seeps into their fingers, warming them from skin to bone. The first traveler to receive a bowl steps aside, settling onto a woven mat beneath an archway. The stew's warmth rises toward his face as he leans forward to take a slow sip. His shoulders ease, as though some tightness inside him has loosened. The flavors lentils softened into a comforting blend, herbs blooming gently in the heat. Hints of onion and meat carry the unmistakable taste of rest. Others follow, forming quiet groups on mats, ledges, and smooth stones. Some eat in silence, savoring each spoonful with closed eyes. Others speak softly between bites, sharing fragments of their journeys or commenting on the quality of the food. One traveler jokes that the stew tastes even better than the version he had last year in another caravanserai, though he humorously adds that anything tastes better than travel rations chewed in the middle of a sandstorm. His companion murmurs agreement through a mouthful of bread, nodding vigorously. Near the stable yard, a small group of travelers sits close to the fire, bowls in hand. One of them, younger and clearly new to the rigors of travel, blows gently on a spoonful of stew before tasting it. He exhales with relief. Another pats his shoulder gently, telling him that he is handling his first long journey better than most. The younger traveler laughs shyly, admitting that he nearly lost his patience earlier when a camel stared him down for no apparent reason. The others chuckle knowingly. One remarks that camels need no reason to stare. They simply judge everyone equally. A camel nearby lifts its head and emits a long, grumbling sound in response, as though confirming the statement. The travelers laugh even more softly, careful not to offend the creature further. The stable hand feeding it murmurs reassurance, though his tone suggests that he knows the camel holds its own opinions. The fires crackle gently in the gathering dusk. Sparks rise occasionally, drifting upward until they vanish into the deepening sky. The scent of roasting, simmering, and warm bread fills the caravanserai more completely than any conversation. The walls, bathed in the gold and blue hue of twilight, seem to absorb the warmth of the fires, reflecting it back into the courtyard. As more travelers finish their meals, the sounds of bowls being set down, spoons gently scraping the last bits of stew, and soft sighs of satisfaction from a subdued chorus. Some travelers sit back, resting their hands on their bellies. Others stretch their legs across the cool stone. A few begin cleaning their bowls with pieces of bread, completing the quiet ritual of supper. With the warm food settling comfortably within them, the travelers' voices soften further. The courtyard becomes a place of slow breaths, shared warmth, unwinding stories that drift in the firelight. Evening draws them closer. Food nourishes not only the body, but the fragile threads of connection. In the heart of the desert, under a young night sky, a simple meal becomes an anchor, a moment where strangers sit as companions, held together by warmth and by the ancient comfort found in gathering to eat. Night settles over the caravanserai with the careful patience of a traveler slipping into a bed of cool woven mats. It does not arrive in a rush. Instead, it descends in delicate layers, dimming the sky from gold to indigo, softening corners, slowing footsteps, and allowing the first stars to pierce through the veil of dusk. The high walls, once bright with afternoon light, now cradle the courtyard in cool shadow, their stone surfaces drinking in the last warmth of the day. A hush spreads gradually around the open space. The earlier murmur of conversation quiets into softer tones, as though every voice instinctively lowers out of respect for the approaching night. Fires flicker beneath archways, their flames rising and shrinking in gentle patterns. The wood burns with a quiet crackle, releasing thin, wandering ribbons of smoke that drift upward toward the darkening sky. The air grows cooler, carrying hints of ash, roasted grain, and the faint sweetness of herbs crushed underfoot. Beneath one of the arches, a merchant adjusts the wick of a small oil lamp. The flame brightens just enough to illuminate his hands, and the edge of a cloth he folds with slow, deliberate care. In the neighboring archway, a traveler sits polishing the metal buckle of his satchel, though the task seems more a matter of calming the mind than improving the shine. His movements are thoughtful, unhurried, each stroke steady, each breath aligned with the rhythm of night settling into the stones. Across the courtyard, the musician from earlier lifts his almond-shaped instrument once more. He plucks a soft, trembling note that shivers in the air like the first star reflected in water. The sound is quiet, shaped for night rather than day. He begins a slow melody gentler than the one played at dusk, as though the darkness has asked him to move with even more softness. The notes drift into the courtyard, sinking into the warm stones and rising with the cooling air. Travelers nearby tilt their heads slightly, letting the melody settle into their thoughts. Under the gateway arch, two guards take their positions. One leans against his spear with a kind of practiced familiarity, his stance relaxed but alert. The other watches the faint glow of desert moonlight beyond the gate. Their conversation is low, shaped by the quiet of night. They speak of the sky's clarity, the wind's direction, and the likelihood that another caravan may arrive before dawn. The older guard observes that travelers often choose this night hour to approach, seeking shelter after a long, uncertain road. The younger one nods, though he adds quietly that he hopes tonight will remain calm. The older guard chuckles, telling him that the desert rarely takes advice from its watchers. In the stable yard, the camels settle with the heaviness of creatures that understand the value of rest. Some kneel with long, slow motions, lowering their weight onto folded legs. Others stretch out in a way that seems to defy their lanky forms. A young camel attempts to lie down gracefully, but miscalculates, tumbling slightly before landing in a puff of dust. The stable boy watching lets out a quiet laugh, then offers a gentle pat on the animal's flank. The camel responds with a sound that straddles the line between complaint and resignation, as though blaming the earth for being too close. The troughs in the stable yard reflect the faint starlight, their surfaces smooth and still. A camel lifts its head from the water, droplets glistening along its muzzle before falling back into the trough with tiny, echoing ripples. The rhythmic chewing of animals on their evening feed fills the air with a soft, steady texture, an earthy counterpart to the musician's lullaby drifting through the courtyard. Travelers begin preparing their sleeping spaces for the night. Mats are unfurled beneath archways, woven blankets shaken lightly to remove the lingering dust. A few travelers choose to lie closer to the open courtyard, preferring the feeling of cool air brushing over their faces. Others seek the edges, where the stone walls offer support and the overhead beams create a sense of shelter. The shifting of mats, the soft rustling of cloth, and the quiet murmur of closing conversations blend into a gentle, settling hum. A scholar sitting near a pillar closes his inkpot with a careful twist and wipes his reed pen before tucking it into a leather pouch. He lifts his parchment, examining the lines he wrote earlier. The firelight dances across the ink, casting moving shadows within the curls of the script. He nods with quiet satisfaction, then rolls the parchment and places it securely in his travel case. As he settles onto his mat, he whispers a few lines to himself, perhaps a prayer, perhaps the beginning of another thought he will write in the morning. The storyteller from earlier leans back against a column, finishing the last of his evening meal. A few travelers gather near him, hoping for one more tale before sleep. He smiles faintly, shaking his head with mock gravity, saying that stories, like camels, require rest if they are to behave in the morning. His listeners chuckle softly, accepting the gentle refusal. He promises to share more when dawn begins its climb. Stories do not hurry, he adds. They walk like caravans. The travelers nod, pleased by the thought. The walls of the caravanserai absorb and echo the night in their own quiet manner. Their high forms cast deep, comforting shadows across the courtyard floor. The occasional shifting of a traveler, the soft sigh of someone settling onto a mat, or the murmur of distant voices ripple gently through the space, fading quickly into the still air. Even the desert wind seems to soften as it passes through the narrow windows, as though reluctant to disturb the rest gathering inside. At the center of the courtyard, the main fire burns low, its flames no longer reaching upward, but glowing steadily like warm embers nestled in a cradle of ash. A few travelers sit beside it, warming their hands. Their silhouettes shift gently as the fire breathes. One leans forward to adjust a piece of wood, coaxing a small flame upward, before letting it settle once more into a quiet glow. The light flickers across their faces, revealing tired eyes softened by the warmth. Above, the sky spreads open into a vast expanse of desert night, deep, boundless, dusted with countless stars. They shimmer with a clarity we rarely seen in cities or settled lands. Travelers tilt their faces upward, letting the sky fill their eyes. One murmurs that the stars along this road look different than those at home. Another replies that perhaps it is the same sky, only seen with different burdens. A third, older traveler says softly that the stars are the only companions that have never abandoned the Silk Road. Their voices drift into the night before falling back into silence, each of them wrapped again in quiet thought. Across the courtyard, someone begins humming a soft tune, barely a whisper. It blends with the crackling of fire, the rustling of sleeping mats, the soft huffs of camels, the distant breeze, and the quiet strums of the musician's instrument. The sounds braid themselves into a single, muted rhythm that wraps around the caravanserai like a protective blanket. Even the desert outside the walls seems to pause, listening. Within the ancient stone enclosure, night gathers softly, not as an ending, but as a deep, cool breath between the labors of the road. The fires glow, the walls hold their wisdom. The travelers drift toward rest, and the caravanserai becomes a cradle suspended between earth and sky. Night deepens fully now, settling into the caravanserai with the quiet assurance of something ancient and familiar. The last murmurs of conversation fade into the corners of the courtyard, softening until they dissolve into the warm hush of the stones. The fires beneath the archways burn low, their glow no longer a flame, but a pulse steady, warm, and gentle. Shadows deepen, pulling long sleeves of darkness across the floor, weaving patterns that shift with each flicker of ember. One by one, travelers settle into their sleeping places. Some lie beneath the arches, where the cool stone wall supports their backs and the narrow beams overhead cast a sense of shelter. Others stretch out on mats closer to the courtyard center, choosing the open sky as their roof. Their blankets rustle softly as they settle in, small clouds of dust lifting and falling again like drifting feathers. A traveler rolls onto his side, pulling a woven cloak up around his shoulders. The cloak carries the faint scent of the region he came from, dried herbs sewn into its fibers to ward off insects. Another traveler tucks a folded tunic beneath his head for a pillow. His tunic is worn thin along the seams, but it smells of home, of long journeys, of roads and memories and distant markets. Even in sleep, travelers hold on to small comforts. At the stable yard, the camels continue their ritual of settling, some with graceful ease, others with a series of dramatic grunts that echo across the stones like a slow protest against the concept of nighttime in general. A young camel sighs loudly as it folds its legs beneath itself, releasing a sound that seems far too expressive for an animal at rest. The stable boy, arranging straw for their bedding, pauses to listen before shaking his head at the unnecessary performance. He pats the camel gently, as if reassuring it that rest is not an insult. The moon rises above the courtyard, bathing the caravanserai in pale silver light. It catches on the edges of pottery, on the curves of slumbering animals, on metal buckles and straps left beside sleeping pads. A faint glimmer sparkles across the surface of the water trough near the gate, turning it into a thin ribbon of reflected sky. Along the eastern walkway, a lone traveler sits awake for a moment, his back pressed against the wall. His hands are clasped loosely around his knees as he gazes up at the stars. The constellations seem sharper here, as though the desert air has polished them clean. He watches them in silence, the corners of his mouth softening into a small, quiet smile. Perhaps he is naming the stars he knows. Perhaps he is remembering the ones he saw from far-off lands. After a while, he lies down, pulling his blanket over him with a slow, contented breath. Further along, a pair of siblings huddle under a shared blanket, whispering quietly so as not to disturb those already drifting into sleep. Their whispers float upward like strands of warm smoke, soft, uncertain, filled with the kind of awe that only long travel can shape. Eventually their voices fade as their breathing deepens into a steady rhythm. The courtyard itself begins to glow faintly. The fires shrink into beds of embers, releasing gentle pops every few moments. Each ember casts a soft, reddish halo around itself, forming constellations of its own in the dim light. Travelers near these small fires hold out their hands instinctively, letting the warmth seep into their palms before withdrawing again. Heat lingers even after they move away, a quiet echo of flame settling into the night. Near the gate, one of the guards shifts his stance, adjusting the spear resting at his side. His companion remains seated, eyes half-lidded but alert. They exchange a few quiet words, simple ones about the calmness of the night, the welcome coolness after a long day of heat, and the chance that another caravan might arrive, while the stars are bright enough to guide them. The older guard remarks softly that some nights carry a kind of stillness that reaches even the wind. Tonight, he says, is one of them. The younger guard nods, even though he is still learning how to hear such stillness. In the far corner of the courtyard, where one small fire continues to breathe steadily, the storyteller from earlier lies with his hands clasped over his stomach. Though he is silent now, his presence still carries the echo of tales told and tales waiting to be told. The flames near him flicker warmly, casting shadows that dance like slow-moving figures across the stone wall. He watches the shifting shapes for a moment, seeing patterns known only to him, perhaps heroes from distant lands, or guides from half-forgotten paths. After a long breath, he closes his eyes. The musician, whose melodies soften dusk, tucks his instrument at his side, wrapping it carefully in cloth to shield it from the cool night air. He lies down beneath a column, its stone smooth beneath his head. Though he does not play now, the memory of his notes lingers in the air like a faint aftertaste of music, drifting between the archways. Far above, the stars continue their slow arc across the night, unhurried. The desert sky stretches outward in every direction, vast and undisturbed. A few travelers open their eyes briefly to look at it before sleep pulls them back into warmth. The sky has watched countless caravans pass, countless nights like this one unfold, countless stories rise and fade. It watches tonight as gently as it has watched everything else. The lanterns hung in small niches along the walkway burn low, their flames shrinking into soft pinpoints of light. The oil inside them shifts quietly with each tiny gust of wind that slips through the arches. Shadows of their wicks dance along the stone walls in slow, wobbling patterns. The air smells of warm stone, fading embers, cold dust, and the faint sweetness of dates left unfinished in a bowl. All around the caravanserai, the fabric of night thickens. Travelers breathe deeply. Merchants curl around their belongings. Camels shift, releasing deep, slow sighs. The fires glow like resting hearts. Still inside the walls, the night holds its own wisdom. It wraps itself around the courtyard, pressing gently into its corners and resting in its beams. In a place built for movement, this is the rare hour where everything is still, where the road sleeps, and the travelers sleep with it, held safely by the old stones that have watched over generations before them. The caravanserai becomes a single breath, slow, deep, steady. A cradle of warmth and quiet nestled in the vastness of the desert. Nothing calls for a haste now. Nothing pulls the mind outward. Only the soft rhythm of night remains. Night deepens further, settling over the caravanserai like a cool blanket drawn slowly, carefully across tired shoulders. The fires that once flickered with bright tongues of orange now glow softly beneath their films of ash. Their warmth lingers in the air, low and steady, like the final breaths of a day that has travelled far. The courtyard lies in near stillness. Only the faintest sounds remain, the slow exhale of a resting camel, the soft shift of a blanket as someone turns in sleep, the delicate tap of a cooling pot settling against stone. These small noises drift through the shadows without urgency, as though the night absorbs each one, unfolds it gently into its wide, quiet darkness. Overhead, the sky stretches vast and serene. Stars shimmer with the clarity that only desert nights can offer. Their light falls through the open roof of the courtyard in thin, scattered beams, brushing lightly across the sleeping forms below. The walls, pale in the moonlight, reflect a cool glow that softens every edge, easing even the harsh lines of stone into something gentle. Breath by breath, the caravanserai grows quieter still. Travelers sink deeper into rest, their bodies curled beneath woven blankets, their minds suspended between memory and dream. The heat of the day dissolves, the weight of the road slips away, and the ancient walls keep their patient watch, holding the silence with a care shaped by centuries. The fires dim, the stars drift, the wind settles, and the night wraps everything in a slow, calming hush. Nothing remains to be done, nothing presses on the mind. Only the cool rhythm of darkness, soft as a whispered lullaby, guiding the caravanserai into its deepest, safest sleep.